The pepper spray stung worse than Jayden could have imagined. His hands flew to his face as the burning consumed him, his vision swimming and his lungs seizing from the acrid mist. He staggered backward, choking, while Karen's shrill voice rang out like a siren. "He was trying to attack me! I had to defend myself!" The crowd of residents around them murmured in shock, their faces flickering with disbelief and unease. Somewhere behind him, a security guard bellowed in anger, and in the distance, the wail of police sirens grew louder. How had it come to this? One moment, he was just trying to get upstairs, and now he was blinded, humiliated, and being accused of a crime he didn't commit. Stay tuned till the end to find out how a quiet night in an upscale apartment building spiraled into chaos. The lobby of the Lexington residences was immaculate, as always. Polished marble floors gleamed under the soft glow of recessed lighting, and the massive crystal chandelier overhead gave the entire room a sense of grandeur. Jayden stepped in, his sneakers squeaking slightly against the tiles as he adjusted the strap of his camera bag. He was exhausted. A long day of shoots, edits, and tight deadlines had left him drained, and the only thing he wanted now was a quick shower before heading out for one last late-night assignment. But he had barely taken 2 steps toward the elevators when he felt eyes on him. It wasn't an unusual feeling. Jayden was used to people staring at him, especially in places like this. The Lexington wasn't exactly the kind of building where you found many young black men in hoodies and scuffed sneakers wandering around, even if he did live there. He had moved in 6 months ago, but the stares, the cautious glances, and the whispers had never really stopped. Tonight, though, the gaze felt different. Heavy, accusatory. He turned slightly, his eyes locking with those of a woman seated near the mailboxes. She was older, her platinum blonde hair styled into a sleek bob, and her beige coat looked expensive, the kind of tailored luxury you'd find in a glossy magazine. Jayden recognized her immediately. Karen. She was one of those residents everyone in the building seemed to know, not because she was friendly, but because she always found something to complain about. Karen's lips tightened the moment their eyes met, her pale blue gaze narrowing in suspicion. Jayden suppressed a sigh and turned back toward the elevators, determined to ignore her. He just didn't have the energy for whatever drama she was about to create. "Excuse me!" Karen's voice cut through the quiet lobby, sharp and commanding. Her heels clicked against the marble as she strode toward him, her coat flaring slightly with each step. "Excuse me, young man!" Jayden froze mid-step, his stomach tightening with dread. He had hoped, foolishly, that she might just leave him alone. Slowly, he turned to face her, forcing himself to keep his expression neutral. "Yes?" he said evenly. Karen stopped a few feet away, crossing her arms over her chest. "Who are you, and what are you doing here?" Jayden blinked, caught off guard by the hostility in her tone. "I live here," he said, keeping his voice calm. "Apartment 14C. Karen's eyebrows shot up, her disbelief almost theatrical. "You live here?" She repeated, drawing out the words as if they were foreign to her. Her eyes swept over him, taking in his hoodie, his sneakers, and his camera bag with thinly veiled disdain. "I don't think so." Jayden's patience was already wearing thin. He shifted his weight, gripping the strap of his bag a little tighter. "I've lived here for 6 months, he said, his tone firmer now. "I'm just trying to get upstairs." Karen's lips curled into a tight, condescending smile. 6 months? She said, her voice dripping with skepticism. "That's funny. I've never seen you before." Jayden resisted the urge to roll his eyes. "Well, maybe because I'm busy working most of the time," he said. He gestured to the badge hanging from his lanyard. "I'm with Channel 9 News. I've got an assignment tonight, and I just needed to grab my keys and gear before heading out." Karen ignored the badge entirely, her eyes narrowing further. "That's a nice story," she said, her voice hardening. "But how do I know you didn't just walk in off the street? We've had break-ins before, you know?" Jayden stared at her, disbelief creeping into his expression. "Seriously? I used my keycard to get in. You need one just to open the front door." Karen's eyes darted to the keycard in his hand, but she didn't back down. If anything, her expression grew more smug, as if she had caught him in a lie. "Keycards can be stolen," she said flatly. "For all I know, you could have found it, or taken it, from someone else." The tension in the air was palpable now, thick and oppressive. Jayden could feel the weight of her gaze, the unspoken accusation hanging between them. He glanced around the lobby, hoping to see someone, anyone, who might step in and de-escalate the situation. But aside from Karen, the only other person in sight was the concierge, who was currently nowhere to be found. Jayden exhaled sharply, forcing himself to stay calm. "Look, I don't have time for this," he said, moving to step around her. "I'm late for work, and I really don't." Karen moved faster than he expected, stepping directly into his path and raising a hand to stop him. "Oh no, you're not going anywhere," she said sharply. "Not until you prove you live here. What's your apartment number?" "I already told you, 14C, Jayden snapped, his voice finally betraying his frustration. Karen didn't budge. "And I suppose you have a driver's license or some other proof of address to back that up?" "It's in my apartment," Jayden shot back. "Where I'm trying to go, if you'll just let me." Karen shook her head, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Not a chance," she said. "Not until someone confirms who you are. For all I know, you're a thief, or worse." Jayden's hands clenched into fists at his sides, his jaw tightening as anger flared in his chest. "A thief? Are you kidding me?" he said, his voice rising. "You've already decided I'm guilty of something, haven't you? Just because of how I look." Karen didn't respond, but the silence was damning. A new voice suddenly cut through the tension. "What's going on here?" Jayden turned to see the building's security guard approaching, his brow furrowed in confusion. Relief washed over him, but it was quickly tempered by the realization that this situation was far from over. Karen immediately launched into her version of events, pointing an accusatory finger at Jayden. "This man is trying to sneak into the building," she said. "I caught him in the act, and now he's refusing to prove he lives here." The security guard frowned, his gaze shifting to Jayden. "Sir?" Jayden sighed, his shoulders slumping. "I do live here," he said. "I told her I'm in 14C, but she won't believe me. I've got my keycard right here. I just need to get upstairs." The guard glanced between them, clearly torn. "All right," he said finally. "Let's head up to 14C and confirm this." Karen bristled. "You can't just let him roam around. What if he's lying?" The guard's patience was clearly wearing thin. "And what if he's not, ma'am?" he said pointedly. "Let's go." Jayden shot Karen a look of pure disdain before following the guard toward the elevator, his chest burning with frustration. But deep down, he knew this wasn't over. Not yet. Stay tuned till the end to see how this confrontation spirals into something much bigger than either of them could have imagined. Jayden blinked back the sting in his eyes as he stumbled backward, his vision blurring, his skin burning like it was on fire. The sharp, acrid scent of pepper spray filled his nose and throat, choking him as he tried to catch his breath. His camera bag slipped off his shoulder and hit the floor with a thud. For a second, he was disoriented, struggling to make sense of what had just happened. Then he heard Karen's shrill voice echoing through the lobby. "He was coming at me!" She screamed, clutching the pepper spray canister like a weapon of triumph. "I was just defending myself!" Jayden clutched his face, his fingers pressed against his closed eyelids, tears streaming down his cheeks as the chemical burned his skin. Around him, gasps and murmurs rippled through the growing crowd of onlookers, residents who had trickled into the lobby to see what the commotion was about. Somewhere nearby, the security guard was shouting, his voice thick with anger and disbelief. "What the hell did you do, Karen?" The guard bellowed, his boots pounding against the floor as he rushed to Jayden's side. "He attacked me." Karen shot back, her voice rising in pitch. "I told you he didn't belong here. I had no choice." Jayden's head snapped up despite the pain, his blurred vision focusing on the vague outline of Karen standing a few feet away. "Are you out of your mind?" he managed to choke out, his voice rasping as the pepper spray's effects ravaged his throat. "I wasn't coming at you. I was just standing here." "I felt threatened," Karen said defensively, taking a step back as if to emphasize her supposed fear. "How was I supposed to know what he was going to do?" The lobby was chaos now. Residents whispered and muttered among themselves, their faces shifting between disbelief and unease. Someone had already called the police. Jayden had heard the hurried phone call just before Karen's attack. Now he could hear the faint wail of sirens in the distance, drawing closer by the second. The security guard turned to Karen, his face red with anger. "Ma'am, You just assaulted a resident of this building, he snapped, his voice trembling with rage. You'd better have a damn good explanation when the cops get here. Karen's face flushed crimson, her carefully constructed veneer of confidence starting to crack. A resident? She scoffed, but there was a tremor in her voice. He's not a resident. He's lying. I've lived here for years, and I've never seen him before. That's because you don't look at people like me, Jayden shot back, his voice sharper now despite the pain. His anger gave him strength, cutting through the haze of humiliation and frustration that had weighed on him all evening. The elevator doors suddenly dinged, and an older woman with a small dog stepped out, her eyes widening at the scene before her. What on earth is going on here? She asked, clutching the leash as the dog barked excitedly. The security guard waved her over. Mrs. Ellis, can you confirm something for me? Do you know this man? He gestured toward Jayden, who was still blinking away tears as he wiped at his face with his sleeve. Mrs. Ellis squinted at him for a moment before her expression softened. Of course I do. That's Jayden from 14C. I see him in the elevator all the time. He's such a polite young man, always asks about Toby. She gestured to the small dog wagging its tail at Jayden's feet. Karen's mouth fell open, her face turning a shade paler. That can't be right, she stammered. He said he lives here, but he doesn't. He can't. Mrs. Ellis turned to Karen, her expression hardening. What exactly are you accusing him of, Karen? Because it sounds to me like you've made a very big mistake. The sirens outside grew louder, and within moments, the glass doors of the lobby swung open as 2 police officers stepped inside. One was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a no-nonsense expression, while the other, a younger woman, immediately scanned the crowd with sharp eyes. The male officer spoke first. We received a call about an altercation. Can someone explain what happened here? Before anyone else could respond, Karen launched into a frantic explanation, her hands gesturing wildly as she recounted her skewed version of events. This man was trying to break in, she insisted, pointing at Jayden, who was now being helped to his feet by the security guard. I tried to stop him, and when he got aggressive, I had to defend myself. I had no choice but to use pepper spray. The younger officer raised an eyebrow, glancing at Jayden, whose red, tear-streaked face and visibly calm demeanor didn't align with Karen's claims. Sir, she said gently, can you tell us your side of the story? Jayden nodded, wincing as he rubbed at his burning skin. I live here, apartment 14C. She's been harassing me since I walked into the lobby. I tried to show her my key card, but she wouldn't listen. Then, out of nowhere, she pepper sprayed me. Is there anyone who can confirm his story? The male officer asked, turning to the crowd. Mrs. Ellis stepped forward without hesitation. I can. He's my neighbor. He's lived here for months. The security guard chimed in as well. I was just about to escort him to his apartment to confirm his address when she sprayed him. This guy's been nothing but respectful the whole time. Karen's the one who's been out of line. The officers exchanged a glance, their expressions tightening. The male officer turned to Karen. Ma'am, did this man physically threaten you in any way before you used pepper spray? Karen faltered, her bravado crumbling under the weight of the evidence mounting against her. Well, no, she admitted reluctantly. But he was acting suspicious. How was I supposed to know he wasn't dangerous? The younger officer folded her arms. Pepper spray is considered a weapon, ma'am. You can't just use it on someone without provocation, especially in a situation like this. She pulled out a notepad and began writing. We're going to need a full statement from you, and depending on what we find, there may be charges for assault. Karen's face went ashen. Charges? But I was just trying to protect myself. Meanwhile, the male officer handed Jayden a small bottle of saline solution. Here, he said, this should help with your eyes. We'll make sure you get a medical evaluation, too. Do you want to press charges? Jayden hesitated, his hands trembling slightly as he rinsed his eyes. Part of him wanted to scream, to demand justice for the humiliation and pain Karen had caused him. But as he looked around at the faces of his neighbors, some apologetic, others still hesitant, he felt a different kind of determination take root. I'm not sure yet, he said finally, his voice steady, but I can promise you this. I'm not letting this slide. By the next morning, Jayden's story was already making waves. He had stayed up late, drafting a detailed post for his news station's social media accounts, describing the incident and the biases that had fueled it. The response was overwhelming. Messages of support flooded in, along with personal stories from others who had faced similar prejudices. Karen, meanwhile, had retreated into her apartment, her reputation in tatters. Rumors swirled about potential legal consequences, but the real fallout was social. Neighbors who had once exchanged pleasantries with her now avoided her entirely, their trust irrevocably broken. As Jayden stood on his balcony that evening, the city skyline stretching out before him, he felt a flicker of hope. The pain and anger of the previous night hadn't disappeared, but they had transformed into something more powerful: resolve. He wasn't just going to tell his story, he was going to make sure it mattered,